Good morning and welcome to the Colorado Grain Chains Homeschool webinar series, number 12 this week. So thank you for joining us. This week we have Jeremiah Church joining us. I'm very excited about that. My name is Dan Waldvogel. I'm the membership coordinator with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. Before we get started, as always, I'll go through just the housekeeping part. The best way to ask a question is through the Q&A function. But there is also the chat box. So if there's anything you just want to express to the group as we move through, you can use the chat box. But if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A function on the Zoom format here. Also, we are recording today. This will be available on coloradograinchain.com. Within a few days, there'll be a link to YouTube, but then also for Colorado Grain Chain members, there'll be notes from this discussion, PowerPoint slides, and then some of this other secret forbidden information that we're able to access every week on these homeschool sessions. So check out the website and think about joining as a member as well. But I will skip right to our featured guest. This is Jeremiah Church. He runs Boreal Heat in Ashland, Oregon. As someone that grew up in the boreal forest, I appreciate the title. But Jeremiah is going to be speaking about modern wood-fired heating and baking for home bakers and startup commercial bakers, and excited to hear your story and what you have to share with us. So I'll hand it over to you, Jeremiah. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And thank you, Andy. And thanks to my friend Hannah. Some of you may know through the Colorado Grain Collective. I'm really glad to be here. Jeremiah, as Dan said, my company's Boreal Heat, and I've been building wood-fired ovens for about 10 years. So we're going to be talking about ovens today. First off, I can talk about a lot of different aspects of wood-fired ovens. So if you came for a specific reason because you're interested in building an oven or operating an oven, if you already have an oven, you have some questions about it, maybe just type that in right now, send it over to Dan, and it'll help me as I'm going through my presentation, kind of tailor it towards what folks are interested in. So yeah, if you have something specific in mind, a question that you came with today, feel free to share it right now. If you don't have anything specific right now, that's fine. We'll get to more questions after the presentation, and maybe it will raise some things for you. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna get into the presentation here. How's that working? Can people see?
Looks good.
Looks good. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So like I said, I've been building ovens for 10 years, pretty much entirely commercial ovens. So we're going to be talking today some about backyard ovens as well, because there might be some interest in that. But we're going to have to get there through the lens of commercial ovens, because mostly I work for bakeries, restaurants, pizzerias, and so that's the most examples I have. However, COVID finally gave me an opportunity to build my own oven, which I was very pleased with, and this is it. Photo by my friend Justin Gordon, and we put it in the back of our '94 Toyota pickup. It's about 3 feet wide and almost 4 feet deep, oval floor plan, 2 1/4 inches of mass, well insulated. Pretty straightforward oven in many ways. Oven construction has not dramatically changed in a very, very long time. So there's nothing new to what I'm doing with this oven or with any other oven, but I've now used this oven quite a bit, and I've got a lot of data on exactly how it's used and how it was built. So it's kind of going to be the case study that we keep coming back to in the course of this presentation. But we'll also be looking at a whole host of other ovens that I've built in the last 10 years. And I'll use them to basically just talk about different aspects of oven construction and oven design, how to go about thinking about and planning your wood-fired oven project. And at the end, we'll get a little bit into how to use ovens and what I've been doing with this oven. I'll talk briefly about that right now. Basically, since COVID hit, my wife and I started a little project we call Flour. We bake once a week out of this oven. We make about 50 loaves of bread. Well, I make about 50 loaves of bread. And my wife is a flower farmer and a florist, and she arranges bouquets. And we deliver them and share them with friends and neighbors just over an email list. It's been a really simple and kind of gratifying way to connect with our neighborhood and expand our community and share something with folks. So it's been a lot of fun for me to finally get a chance to use these ovens that I've been building for a long time and talking with bakers about for a long time, but never really digging in myself. So that's kind of what I'm up to right now. Masonry's picked up again, so I've been slowing down on the baking, but we were doing it once a week there for a while. And yeah, we'll talk about that at the end if we have some time. And we'll be talking about the construction of this oven throughout the presentation. So with that said, I'm going to say thanks to many of the folks who got me here. Wood-fired oven building is a tradition that's been going for many thousands of years, and I do not claim to have invented anything. So I'm really grateful to everybody that I've learned from, all of my mentors. So, you know, Alan Scott, I never got to learn from directly, but I built a few Alan Scott ovens as I was getting started. And, you know, really few individuals have done as much as Alan did to revive and revitalize wood-fired oven building in North America. So very grateful to him. Great book he wrote with Dan Wing. I had the pleasure of working with Dan Wing on a project a couple of years back. He's a great guy. So, you know, Alan Scott, great guy. Turtle Rock Masonry Heat. William was my first mentor in oven building, and, you know, I just owe everything to him. So very grateful. Old Stone Heat, Antoine Gerlain, another guy that I worked with early on, and he's now a baker, baking out of a double deck 5x8 wood-fired oven. It's the biggest one I know of that's operating in North America. If anybody wants to share a bigger oven that they know about, I'm all ears, but Antoine's badass. Grateful to him. Elmore Mountain Bread. Many of you probably know Elmore Mountain Bread. Blair and Andrew at least know of them. They really got William of Turtle Rock started on modern wood-fired oven building. So, you know, they have a lot to do with what we're doing right now as a group of wood-fired oven builders, and specifically the idea of integrating loaders. So that's really a commercial thing, you know, for commercial ovens, but their work really has revived wood-fired oven building in the last 10 years or so, I would say. The Masonry Heaters Association is the group that I belong to. That's where you can find your wood-fired masons doing all kinds of fun and cool things. And if anybody on this call is interested in becoming a mason yourself or learning about wood-fired oven building more seriously, it is hands down the best education you can get to go to the annual meeting where we build 6 or 7 different ovens, heaters, maybe a tandoor, maybe a rocket stove, and we fire them all over the course of a week, and we make a bunch of pizza, and then we tear it all down at the end of the week. There's no better way to get involved in wood-fired oven building. So yeah, thanks to all the people who got me here. Dan, any questions rolling in that before I launch my presentation kind of might shape our conversation?
Sure, yeah. There's one that I got through email that after this, I will share my screen so you can see the image. So we'll go back to that one, but it's a question about specifically about building off of a smoker. So we'll circle back to that.
Okay.
But then there was a question how they differ from hornos, as in New Mexico. So,
Okay.
and then there's one other question just about how pizza ovens work in regards to bread, and you know maybe what some of the differences are. Have you seen a good mobile pizza / bread oven? So, that's kind of what we have coming in right now.
Cool. Yeah, some of that we're going to cover, and the hornos of New Mexico, not something I have a lot of familiarity with, but I can maybe make up an answer. So we'll see how I do. All right. So we're going to start with why wood-fired ovens. and a little bit why not wood-fired ovens. I, like most people, I imagine I got into wood-fired baking and wood-fired oven building because I have a wide romantic streak and, you know, just sort of a love for it. And that in and of itself is a good reason to get interested. And it's not necessarily a good reason to decide you want to own a wood-fired bakery. I think of wood-fired ovens being sort of like natural fermentation. They are, you know, relative to the commercial yeast that you can buy. It's going to be more work. It's going to be more unpredictable, more dynamic, more alive. Using wood-fired oven versus a, you know, plug-in gas oven. And then the comparison stops there, because actually natural fermentation is superior in flavor and you know, health benefits, obviously. But wood-fired ovens, you know, heat is heat, and especially for bread, you're pulling the coals out, you're baking with the stored heat in the mass, and you know, you can make great bread in a wood-fired oven, and you can make terrible bread, and I don't think it really improves the quality of your bread. So it's more of a lifestyle choice. It's a choice to use local resources in the same way we want to use local grains when we're baking bread. We want to use local fuel, get to know our woods, get to know, you know, where there's an opportunity to harvest a resource that's maybe, you know, cleaning up our forests in the West, for instance. And what kind of woods perform in different ways in the oven to achieve different results. Those are all great reasons to really get into it. But you know, the reason I bring this up is because I get people calling me and say, oh, I've never baked in wood-fired oven before, but I know that I really want to do this. It's a lot to bite off. So just first thing I tell everybody, go work with somebody with a wood-fired oven and use it and learn about the schedule, especially because if you're baking every day of the week out of an oven, there's something happening around the clock in your bakery, whether it's a fire or the oven is saturating or you're, you know, so it's a big commitment. And that's something to consider. All right. Getting a little bit into planning ovens. This is a construction photo from our backyard oven in the pickup truck. So these will, I guess everything becomes available as notes, so you don't have to write any of this down. But here's how I go about sizing ovens. We need to know how much bread you want to make. This is generally for a commercial bakery, but it could apply to a large home operation as well. You figure each load, you get 1 or 1.5 loaves per square foot of hearth space. More if you're using strap pans or loaf pans, probably closer to 2 loaves per square foot, maybe even a little more. And you get 1 load per inch of oven mass. So using my oven as an example, I've got about 9 square feet. I can bake 14 hearth loaves or 20 pan loaves in this oval per round. And I can, with my 2.5 inches of mass, I can make about 3 rounds of bread. So do the math, somewhere between 45 and 60 loaves per firing. So that gives you your baking capacity estimate. I've also got some notes on fuel consumption here, especially again, if you're planning a bakery, a wood-fired bakery, first thing you want to think about, where am I getting my fuel from? Where am I going to store it? Do I need to be drying it? How much space do I need? So I burned 35 pounds of wood to get this oven up to an average of 600 degrees or so. And I can bake 90 pounds of dough with that. 2.5 to 1 dough to fuel. A bigger oven is going to be more efficient, generally speaking, but this gives you a place to start thinking about, okay, I can get 4,000 loaves per cord. Probably none of you maybe need to know that, but fun fact. Okay, so that's sizing an oven. Somebody asked about bread versus pizza. So here's the slide on that. This is a pizza oven on the right, bread oven on the left. There's a lot of overlap, but generally speaking, the one difference is in vault height. You're going to want a lower vault for your bread oven to keep that steam locked in close to the bread. Slightly higher vault for the pizza oven, so that as the flames are kind of reaching out over the dome, they are you know, not too close to your pizza and causing scorching. And And, typically you're going to get a rectangular bread oven and a round pizza oven. To some extent, that's just ergonomics. It's easier to load and pack tightly and organize a rectangular oven. Also, a lot of bread bakers use sheet pans for various reasons, making focaccia, maybe initially cooling their hearth if it's too hot. So they'll fit, you'll get a better hearth coverage with your sheet pans with a rectangular oven. But having said that, I've built, I've seen quite a few round bread ovens, never built one, and I've built quite a few rectangular pizza ovens, and they work just fine. So there's nothing inherent to the shape of the hearth that's going to promote one over the other. To some extent, it's an aesthetic choice. While we're looking at round versus rectangular ovens, there is a difference in structure. Round ovens essentially will hold themselves up. You do not need a form to build a round brick oven if you're doing it properly. Barrel vaulted ovens will not hold themselves up. The barrel wants to flatten and go outwards. And so we retain that with a harness, which we'll talk about later. Moving on, also bread ovens have a little more mass versus pizza ovens. With a pizza oven, your hearth is constantly recharging from the fire. And so you don't actually need much of a battery of heat in the hearth. And I think but again, you can do an oven that will do both things well. But maybe now's a good time to say that if you're baking pizza 6 days a week, your oven, if it's well built, will never get cool enough for bread, because pizza is cooked at 750 to 850 typically. And bread, starting at 600 is pretty hot. And your oven just won't even cool down that much in 24 hours if it's well insulated and well built. So if you're planning an operation and doing both, you need 2 ovens. Or if you're only baking bread 1 day a week, you got plenty of time to make pizza. So that's bread and pizza ovens. Code. There's more to say on this than I'm going to bother with right now. In short, you just need to think about it. If you're planning a commercial venture, look into it. Talk to me if you don't know how to begin, and get it, in the works from the beginning, because it's the world we live in. Okay, so this is more fun than code. I love working with clients on projects, and these are a couple of examples of projects that I've had some help with. So it's just something to think about. If you're wanting to do a build, consider your own skills, watch a bunch of YouTube videos. Maybe you're thinking about doing it yourself. You can totally do that. You can do that with support by buying a kit, or hiring someone such as myself to consult, or you can hire a professional and work alongside one of us. Frankly, if you've never done it before, that's my favorite method. I really love working with clients on their project. I think it gives them a lot of education and investment in their project. So that's something to consider. This is my slide on why not to bite it all off yourself. This is the moment where a dome oven, where the arch of the door intersects the dome. And the geometry of dome ovens is already pretty exciting and complex, and you get to use your high school trigonometry and cut bricks in 3 different angles in order so that they'll fit together into a dome with very tight mortar joints everywhere. But it really gets complex where the arch and the dome come together. And this is the kind of situation where you want somebody who's done this before. All right, getting into some specific projects and examples of how you can go about building an oven. So basically, I think of ovens as being composed of anywhere from 3 to 5 parts, depending on where you begin. But let's do the full wrap. So you need a foundation. You need some sort of base, getting yourself up to working height. You have an oven core, which is the functional fire brick, typically, or refractory concrete or cob. Center of the oven, you've got insulation outside of that, and the core may or may not have a harness, by the way. And again, we'll get to that later. You've got insulation outside of that, and then you've got your facing, which is completely separate and could be almost anything as long as it's non-combustible. All it exists is to retain the insulation, hold the door on, and then you got your chimney. So there you go. That might have even been 6 different phases. So we're talking about bases to begin with. There's a horse trailer here that I think could make a fun oven base. This is an interesting project in LA. It's suspended off the ceiling of on the right here, the frame of the oven is suspended off the ceiling. It's not actually bearing on the floor. Some creative ways. This is that Chicago project we were talking about. And these are steel studs with a concrete slab on top. So many ways to make a base for an oven. An all welded base of steel. This is a dry laid stone base, just filled with rubble and sand in the middle, on top of a poured concrete foundation. This oven has a concrete block base with a thin stone veneer over the concrete block and slab to hide that. And also it's built partially into the bedrock of the site. So, you know, there's that. This is the style of base that Alan Scott used. It's called a floating rebar slab, and they were insulated underneath. It has some advantages in terms of coupling functions to maximize efficiency of construction. The disadvantage is that the insulation typically falls out if it's not done really well. Complete poured concrete base. Okay, timber frame base on the left, which you'll want to insulate well if you're going to use wood as part of your base, but it can be done, just be thoughtful. And on the right, the most standard base that I ever build, which is concrete block and poured concrete. And yeah, that's George. George is my good oven building buddy from way back, and maybe we'll tell some stories about George later. But and then the base for our pickup truck oven is obviously the pickup truck bed plus this kind of timber framed pallet that I worked up so that I'd be able to remove it later if I wanted to. Okay, on top of your base, you've got insulation to keep your hearth warm. And I use a couple of different types. The black stuff is called foam glass. So that's one excellent option. It's slightly more fragile and not quite as up to high weight as this, which is calcil board insulation. So those are the 2 primary structural insulations I use. You'll also see people using cast vermicrete, and that's a fine option. It's not quite as insulative as these sort of industrially manufactured options, but it's inexpensive and it'll work pretty well in a pinch. This is, by the way, the rebuild of the Elmore mountain bread oven. That's why there's a smoke-stained front wall that's left intact. Okay, our oven, calcil board, a little bit of tin foil between layers, which reflects back the radiant heat from the hearth coming down through. Moving up from your sub-hearth insulation, you've got your hearth. And this is the hearth for a round oven. I like to build them before I build the walls for a round oven, whereas for a square rectangular oven, I would build the walls first and then set the hearth within. It's an example of a hearth in a square oven. This is a herringbone hearth. So I highly recommend this laying hearth's herringbone for a couple of reasons. One is, as you're moving your peel, as you're sliding your peel across the hearth, you're never sliding at a direct 90-degree angle to what's on the hearth, to the joints. So you're always slightly off, the angle slightly offset. Also, it's structurally sounder because each brick is pushing out against the entire hearth at once. So just believe me on that one. This here is another interesting example of a hearth where you've got kind of a trough in the middle you build your fire in the trough. You can rake your coals forward as your fire burns and place a grill across the hearth, and you can be making pizza and grilling whatever you want to grill at the same time. That's Erling's restaurant in Chicago. This is an example of using cast concrete for your dome. It is one heck of a lot easier. If you are building your oven at home and not hiring a professional and you want to do it yourself, I don't think there's any better solution than a sand form and a cast concrete oven. And you can see we're welding some reinforcement because this is a trailer oven, making sure that the cast dome doesn't slide around. But 99% of the time I build with bricks because I love bricks and they're just fun and beautiful. Okay, I said I would talk a little bit about harnesses. So as you're going up with the brick walls of your oven, you're getting ready to keep, build your vault. You need to put a harness in place so that as the vault tries to spread, like I said, it's retained by these large steel members. So basically it's steel and threaded rod, and here's another example of a harness on a round oven. This is redundant because, like I said, round ovens will support themselves, but who knows what happens over many, many years of service. So we also strap them, and like I said, using steel and threaded rod, keep that strap to kind of hug the whole oven together. This is our pickup truck oven, and I did not use any steel for the harness in this oven at all. Instead, I used an Allen Scott technique, which I don't have any pictures of, unfortunately, but after this phase, I put a thin layer of mortar or concrete over the entire dome and embedded steel mesh in that. So it's sort of like a reinforced ferro cement jacket for the oven. Allen Scott called that cladding, and that was what retained the vaults in all of the Allen Scott Designs ovens. It's another effective way to do it. Most modern oven builders use steel these days, steel harnesses, because you can more effectively kind of get the mass that you want for the oven and the insulation that you want and separate those things and have a structural element that you can engineer and know exactly how it's going to perform. And I think over time, we've seen some of the Allen Scott ovens that had that ferro cement cladding start to walk outwards. Having said that, many of them are also still performing very well today. So neither, both options can be done well and both can be done poorly, as in most things. Okay, as you're going up with your walls, it's also time to move into the oven exit. So this is the beginnings of, you can see where the angled bricks are. Another arch is going in there, and that will form out the oven throat where the flue gases transition from the oven to the chimney. So if you're building an outdoor oven, a throat is not strictly necessary because you're happy to just let the smoke pour out of the oven and into the air. But most people want a throat to conduct the smoke away from their face, away from the enclosure that they're in, even if it's an outdoor open air building. A throat might be a place you integrate a damper, especially if the exit for the oven is inside of the door. So you want to think about that. It seems this is one of the details that I've seen backyard oven builders miss when they're not professionals. And an oven without a damper and an ineffective door system is not going to hold heat for any period of time. And this is an oven that I built. I bring this up as a whoops. I don't honestly love the shape of it. So I guess this is a cautionary tale of think about going to impact the look of your oven because it has a big effect. There's a couple other throat designs. You can see our pickup truck oven coming to fruition here, and another oven that's got a very kind of prominent masonry throat as a feature. So we're getting into insulation. This is vermicrete, and it's very cool to use in this kind of circumstance because you can sculpt it so beautifully, and it becomes both a substrate for a plaster and also the insulation around the oven. But most often I insulate ovens using a combination of tin foil, wrapping the entire masonry to reflect the radiant heat back into the oven, followed by Calcil, that's or sorry, not Calcil, that's ceramic wool blanket, the white stuff, and the green stuff is Roxol insulation. They're both high temperature effective insulations. The Roxol is made out of spun kind of steel slag, I think. It's a recycled material. And the ceramic wool is made out of spun ceramic fiber. It's a little higher quality and a little more expensive, so I tend to use ceramic wool closer to the oven and then followed by some layers of rock wool. I aim for on a home oven 3 to 5 inches, and on a commercial oven 5 to 12 inches sometimes of insulation. And then from insulation, you move to enclosure. So as I said before, the enclosure is really just holding the door system on and protecting your oven from the weather. You can do it out of many, many different materials. So this is really where you get to kind of express what you want with your oven. And so, there's a traditional kind of brick enclosure. I did not do the mural on this, but I did the plaster, and then the mural artist came and painted it's a lime plaster. I think they did a beautiful job. It's a bagel oven. This oven is actually painted because it was required to be painted by commercial code, with the tile detail. And another steel enclosure, slightly different look. Another plastered enclosure. This is a thin brick wrapping a round oven, herringbone weave. The dry laid stone that I showed earlier, and another example of a brick backyard oven. And our oven, I finished with plaster and a tile detail. Okay, getting a little further out there, you've got a few other types of ovens. Double deck ovens, I've shown a couple pictures of. I've built a few of them. They're fired and used slightly differently than more of a normal oven, and primarily I've only built them in commercial contexts, but they can be a lot of fun, and we can talk more about that if people want to. Guillard or furnace ovens were common in this country 100 years ago and are still very common in France. We built a few and I worked for Turtle Rock, and we didn't get the details right, and we can talk more about that if people want to, but basically the short story on that is I've stopped building them, but the French know all about these and there's something to be said for them. White ovens, Yopi is a common importer from Portugal or Spain. I'm not quite sure which. And it's a hybrid masonry and steel oven where the heat goes around the oven enclosure rather than through. So a black oven is an oven where the fuel is combusted inside the baking chamber, and a white oven, the fuel is combusted outside the baking chamber. Then there's also steam tube ovens that are outfitted with a wood firebox, like at Miller's Bakehouse. Fantastic option for commercial use. And, you can do all kinds of wood-fired tandoors, wood-fired grills, oven hybrids. There's a long tradition of fire and bricks and food all across the world. Okay.
While we're on that, Jeremiah, too, do you want to go back to that question around the Hornos in New Mexico? And I don't know if you had any ideas or you wanted to make up some ideas, but I thought that might be a good spot to.
Well, so I mean, Hornos are a type of cob, right? It's an adobe. I don't know their construction techniques, so I'm not going to make it up. But I can speak a little bit to building clay ovens. I've built a few. Kiko Denzer, friend of mine and neighbor in Oregon, is really the authority. So, for those interested in clay and cob ovens, Build Your Own Earthen Oven is the go-to book. I love a hybrid approach where you might have like a fire brick inner lining because of the density and functionality of the material, but you can still use clay-based natural insulations around the fire brick lining, and Kiko's got a lot of good articles on that on his website, Handprint Press. And in short, whenever people are considering clay ovens, I think they're a great option. they're a lot of labor. So it's definitely something that you're not going to save anything if you hire a professional to build a clay oven. But if you're doing it yourself, they're very cheap. And if you just think about durability, they'll last. I've known bakers who have used clay ovens once a week for 3 years and their oven's falling apart. But that's pretty good. That's 150 uses out of an oven that cost them $500. So if you are someone who's not going to use your oven very often, I would definitely build a clay oven. And if you want to use it a lot, or you're concerned about wood consumption, for better or for worse, using modern industrial materials, you're going to have a much more efficient oven. And if anyone else out there knows more about Adobe ovens and wants to chime in later, I'm all about hearing that. But I am aware of time, so I'm going to try to just get through the presentation, and then we'll get to a few more questions. So basics on firing an oven, the number one thing is weigh your wood. Get a scale and weigh your wood, and weigh it the same every time and take notes. It's going to really help you consistently fire your oven. And the other thing I would add to that is almost all ovens, you don't want to just pack them full and light them. You want to start with a small fire. In our case, we use 10 pounds of wood to start. And as that, once the fire catches and the whole pile is burning, that's the time to add more wood. Maybe you're adding it 15 to 20 pounds at a time. It depends on the size of your oven. And as that catches, you can add more wood if need be. And the reason for that is that if you add all of the wood at once and then light it, it will smolder for a long time as all of that cold wood kind of comes up to temperature. But if you start with a small fire and then build up as you're gaining temperature and as you're gaining heat, you'll be able to have a cleaner burn and a more efficient burn, and it's safer. So that's the short story on. Oh, and then if you don't have a thermometer, the best way to gauge how you're doing temperature wise is to see if the inside of your oven is burned clean. To average out at about 600 degrees for our bake, I look for somewhere between a third and a half of the bricks to burn clean at the rear of the oven where I'm building my fire. And that's enough. If I burned the entire oven clean, I would do that if I was making pizza. But for bread, I would have way too much heat. After you fire an oven, you use it, or you always let an oven saturate. A light oven like ours only needs an hour or two to have the heat even out throughout it. But a big, heavy commercial oven, that'll take overnight. You'll after the fire, you'll close everything down, close the dampers, close the doors, and you'll leave it for 8 to 12 hours to really get it fully saturated and have the heat even throughout. That's a very important phase after firing for baking. So just a few stats. Using our home oven, we can get up to 400 degrees in an hour if you're making empanadas for dinner. If you want to make pizza, it takes us 3 to 4 hours to get up to 800 degrees throughout the oven. And if I close it up and let it sit overnight, I lose about 10 to 15 degrees per hour. So, if I close it up at 800 degrees, the next morning it's still at 670, something like that. When you're cooking for pizza and sizing an oven for pizza, you always need to remember that half of the hearth needs to be open while you're baking so that half is recharging. And then you put, the next pizza that goes in moves there. And that's how you're able to continuously bake pizza commercially all night. It's important to remember that because people often, you might undersize a pizza oven if you don't think, okay, I'm going to need half of this open during service. Cleaning ovens, you rake out the coals, brush out the ash with either a natural fiber brush or a brass bristle brush, and then use a very well wrung out mop. And that's important because you don't want to splash cold water on your hot hearth. It's degrading to the bricks in the long term to have that kind of thermal shock. So you squeeze out your mop really well and then give it a quick swipe and you're ready to bake. Same thing goes for when you're steaming your oven. You don't want to spray your hearth directly. You want to spray as little as possible in general, but a little bit of spraying, everybody does it. And so you try to use a fine mister and you try to aim up and back towards, your oven vault or dome. And, I think most of us are familiar with wood-fired ovens that there's a long heat curve. And so the day after we bake, we're still making muffins and we're making granola and we're roasting nuts and we're simmering lard and stock. I've left big cuts of meat in overnight. It's a wonderful and fun way to cook. So, that's the beauty of wood-fired ovens. You can really sort of center your whole weekend around firing them and using them. Okay. I talked a little bit about flower. Like I said, we're arranging bouquets and baking loaves and sharing them with our friends and neighbors. It's been a lot of fun, and it's given me a lot of insight into how these ovens work. But I'd like to get to your questions, so I'm not going to talk more about that now. My next project, besides some other oven building, is I'd like to kind of standardize and streamline oven designs and hardware and offer a package of hardware and design and support for construction to do-it-yourself builders. So that's on my mind, and if anyone has questions about that, we can talk about it. So that's it. I think we got to the questions. If anyone, I don't know, Dan, do we have any questions out there, or should I keep?
Yeah, no,
yelling?
we got a couple, and yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for the presentation. Honestly, I had no clue how much sophistication and technique was involved in not only the design but the use of them. So thank you for that. One question that Suzanne had was the material you're using for your hearth. You mentioned bricks, but do you have any other insight on what materials you're using?
Yeah, for sure. It's a whole topic. There are a lot of, all kit ovens are generally refractory castable or refractory concrete, which just refractory means high temperature. So we're just talking about high temperature concretes using specific binders that work well. So I always use bricks. I like that they're strictly clay. There's nothing else in a refractory fire brick. So I like to use bricks in the hearth. And I would generally say, if you're building a home oven, you can certainly consider using red brick, especially if you've got some reclaimed red brick for the walls. But in the hearth, I always say use fire brick. And that's because the hearth takes the most beating. And so you want the, highest quality material that you can use. Same goes for cob ovens. You use cob in the dome and in the walls, but not in the hearth. But as far as performance-wise, bricks and refractory concrete are very similar, and there is a range of different, qualities that we're looking at for a really good performing hearth brick. The details of which are maybe too much to go into here, but if somebody has specific questions, I can email you a whole lecture about what kind of bricks you want to seek out. But the bottom line is 99% of the time, the bricks that are available from your local, fire brick dealer are going to be great.
Okay, great. Yeah. And I think Suzanne had a follow-up too, just wanting to address potential toxicity if you were using the wrong materials.
Yeah. In Europe, they do certify certain materials, food grade and safe and all that. And that's very cool. There are also beginning to be certified food safe materials here in North America. Specifically, the refractory supplier I work with most commonly, Harbison Walker International, has a line of materials called ovens, and they're certified food safe for NSF use. I don't know much about that, but again, the fire brick that I use and all fire brick are strictly clay. And, that doesn't mean that they're 100% safe all the time, but they're very basic, and there's very little, manufactured or synthesized elements to them. So I feel good about that.
Great. Yeah. Let's see. Can you talk about different types of wood that are good for use for building fires? What all different kinds of wood are you using?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm just going to turn off our slideshow here if I can figure out how. There we go. Okay. So yeah, you can use a lot of different woods, especially when it comes to just heating the oven, like a bread oven. since you're going to be completely cleaning out the wood at the end of the firing, um, it doesn't really matter. I don't use any painted wood. I don't use any treated wood. I don't use any plywood. But as far as firewood or just anything that's just plain wood, you can definitely burn softwood in your oven. In general, when burning softwood, you want to clean your chimney maybe a little more often because softwood tends to burn a little dirtier. But the oven is a great place to burn it, probably better than your wood stove because it's going to burn hotter. And when it comes to pizza, you want finely split hardwood, and it doesn't necessarily matter what, unless you're like using your oven as a smoker, and then you might consider apple. But pretty much any finely split hardwood will work for pizza, and by finely split I mean 1 to 3 inch more or less diameter, or split down to that size. And the most important thing, regardless of what you're firing for bread, for pizza, overnight, or whatever, is that your wood be dry. And that's just the number one thing for all wood burning, but it's amazing how rarely it happens, especially if you're working a commercial bakery and you're going through 20 cords a year, and where are you going to stack all that and dry it all? So yeah, but at any scale, that's the number one thing, dry your wood.
Okay, great. I am going to try and share my screen and see if you can see this picture. It's as big as I can get it, but the question was thoughts on building an oven off this smoker. Can you see that picture right there?
An oven off of the smoker. I can see a grill. Is the grill the smoker? It looks like a grill to me.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe.
Maybe I'll talk a little generically about smokers and ovens. I have one client, and he's from Texas but lives in Washington now, who we built a double deck oven for him, and he does run it as a smoker. Double deck oven has 2 chambers and they're connected by a throat. So he's just got his little coal fire going in the bottom chamber, and with his whatever smoking chips or flavored wood you want to have on there. And the smoke courses through the upper chamber, and he does like 3-hour Texas style barbecue, pulled pork and beef cuts and things like that, real slow and low on the off day when he's not baking. So, certainly you can get creative, but basically to make something a smoker, you need 2 chambers, the chamber where you're generating the smoke and the chamber where you're smoking your food. So we can talk more about that. You'll get my contact info at the end of this. If someone has specific questions about a conversion project, maybe that would be the time to talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah, that'll be great. And any unanswered questions at the end, we'll get over to you to get answered too, which would be amazing. One more here about, for a home oven, do you build a thermometer into the wall? If not, what approach to testing the temperature do you use? You talked about the bricks burning clean, but any other idea about thermometers?
Sure. First off, a really time-tested method of determining temperature is taking a handful of flour or cornmeal and tossing it on your hearth. You can kind of toss it and spread it out so you get a reading across your hearth. And it will do one of a couple things. It will certainly brown if your oven's hot, and it may burst into flame. And so you can count how long it takes to burst into flame, or how long it takes to turn black if your oven's not hot enough for it to combust. And that will, if you do that repeatedly, you'll start to get a sense of what is an appropriate temperature. So you'll always have the tools for that, regardless of whether your batteries run out or not. So it's a good one to get used to. And secondarily, yes, I always build in probes into commercial ovens. For a home oven, if you want to, go for it. They're inexpensive. A thermocouple from eBay is going to run you $100 with a reader. But a laser if your oven's already built, don't worry about it. Get a laser thermometer. They use the average function, where you move the laser across the hearth or across the walls of your oven, and then the screen will pull up a little average temperature, and that'll give you a pretty good sense of where you're at.
Yeah, great. Cool.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, we've had a couple folks just mentioning, about building small backyard ovens, but then some around indoor home ovens. Just wondering a couple questions on like, could you provide ballpark numbers for a cost for like a home oven?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I totally neglected that. Okay, so I said our oven is 3 feet by almost 4 feet. So that's a large home oven, first of all. If you're really just baking for yourself and your family, 2 feet by 3 feet is plenty, maybe too big. Like I said, I can do 15 to 20 loaves of bread in that oven. At any rate, to build it for someone else would have run maybe $5,000 or $6,000 to have me do it. And of that, the materials cost is probably about half. So somewhere between, let's say around $2,500. So if you're going to do it yourself, those are a range you might be looking at. And so that's why a cob oven might be a very good place to start. If that sounds like a lot of money to spend on an oven, you can certainly build a cob oven for $500 and even less if you're scrappy. Um, so that's a bit of a range for backyard ovens. It's hard for a professional oven builder to do anything for less than $5,000. And more often, when by the time you've considered a foundation and a roof and any excavation costs, you're pushing up north of $10,000. And that's one reason that I'm interested in offering design kits to streamline and simplify, and so that people can, we can get in at a lower price point. And companies like Forno Bravo are already offering precast kits, and I don't know the realm of cost there, but I'm sure you can look it up easily.
Well, yeah, right along those lines. Yeah. Anything else you want to let us know about your services and what you do? And
Um, yeah, I'm available. I love talking about ovens. So if people have more questions, they're certainly welcome to reach out to me by phone or email. Um, like I said, the bulk of my business is building wood-fired ovens for bakeries, and we travel all over to do that. We also build mobile ovens. You saw a few in there, and that can be for bread or for pizza. Um, and maybe we're going to get into selling, Toyota Tacoma pickup truck ovens. So send me rusty Toyotas that you don't want anymore, and we'll convert them, and we can even add a smoker or something. So
there you
that'll
go.
be fun.
Well, I know, a lot of farms, it hasn't seemed to be as popular here in Colorado, but I've heard all over the country, these like pizza farms where people will do a dinner, on a Friday night or whatever, and it's a good agritourism enterprise and brings stuff in. So even having a mobile oven that farms could share or something could be a really great opportunity for folks.
Yeah, a buddy of mine, oven builder up in Eugene, is doing just that on his farm. Built an oven similar size to what I've got, and they've been doing great. Really great business for them, and also a good, neighborhood and community building business. Doing the local pizza, just pick up only, I'll take out right off the farm. People love it. So definitely, if you're considering that type of project, sounds like you've got a wide open market in Colorado. What's going on, Colorado? Why are you behind?
Yeah. Well, so appreciate it. We're just about at time, but I think we have time for this last question that came in here. Um, Hannah was saying, looking at a commercial bread oven, what's the biggest size hearth you've made, and any ideas about how many loaves of bread those bakeries make per bake?
Yeah. Thanks, Hannah. Hi, Hannah. Elmore Mountain Bread is the biggest oven that I've built. So when we rebuilt it, I think we bumped it up a little bit to a 6 foot wide and 12-foot deep hearth. So that's like a 70 to 100 loaf per load, and those guys can do, I mean, if they want to, which they don't, they could do 11 or 12 loads. Nobody wants to do that because that's an extremely long bake day. But you're looking at an oven that could potentially bake, I don't know, 1,500 loaves of bread. But more happily and more efficiently, I think they bake 500 to 700 loaves of bread in a 3 or 4 hour bake day instead of a 12-hour bake day, which is how long it would take to get to that 1,500 number. So that's the biggest hearth that we've built. Historical oven building that's a tiny hearth, 14 by 14 easily. We see in historical record, and I got to build an oven in the place of where there had been a early 20th century oven in Vermont. And, that thing took up the whole room. And then we built this oven that we consider decent size nowadays that was like in 1/3 of the space. So, when people really made bread with wood-fired ovens, and that was the only way to do it, ovens were huge. So, and then I mentioned Antoine's oven has, since it's 2 decks, it's 2 5x8 decks. So that's about 80 square feet, slightly bigger than the Elmore Mountain Bread single deck oven. But I'm game to build a bigger oven if anybody wants a big oven. Let's do it.
Oh, there you go.
Sounds like Hannah wants a bigger oven. I
Hannah?
would just pipe in here in defense of Colorado. We've got a few wood-fired ovens out here, and at my bakery, Moxie Bread Co., we in the inside we're working on a traditional deck oven, gas-fired deck oven, but we've always had an outdoor brick oven for pizza and for pizza parties, and every year we buy a bigger one because it's never big enough to keep up with the crowd. And the satisfaction of, number one, being outside and cooking food, number two, staring at fire like our cavemen ancestors, and number three, just throwing a party outside with all your friends and customers is amazing. And it adds so much depth and meaning to what we do on the inside of the building all week. My staff loves to come and work the pizza shift and get to hang out and talk to customers and try to become a master at a very difficult, seemingly simple, but very difficult art of making a great pizza, making 150 great pizzas, So
Yeah.
I would advocate, for me, it's been a kind of, transformational life thing to get closer to all of those really elemental things, baking with fire, baking outdoors, and simple pizza.
Yeah. Very cool. Hey, hope I get out there sometime. That sounds like a good party. I was just going to mention, while we're talking about biggest ovens that we know of, Alex Chernoff in Toronto, Canada is a real luminary in the oven scene right now. So if you're interested in what's going on in commercial wood-fired ovens, you got to check out Stove Master out of Toronto. They were actually the leads on the Chicago project. And I mention him because he has built a 7-foot wide dome oven, hand-built individual brick by brick without a form, which is the largest that I know of. It was for an Iranian grocery up in Toronto, and I believe it has 2 doors. I'm not quite sure what they're using it for, but that's a killer oven. So, there's lots of possibilities. Every oven is different that I build and that Alex builds. So we're always interested in, getting a phone call and hearing what people are looking for.
Awesome. Well, just can't thank you enough for joining us today. And we did get a little bit more information in the chat box from Aaron around that transitioning or connecting an oven to that smoker. So we'll connect you with that to get that question answered. But just want to thank everyone for tuning in. And, it doesn't matter who you are, if you're growing the grain, you're baking pizza in the backyard, throwing a big party, or heck, if you're the one building these ovens, there's a place for you in the grain chain. So tune in to coloradograinchain.com to learn more. Thank you again for being with us, Jeremiah. And until the next time, sure appreciate it, and have a great day.
All right. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. Glad to chat.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care.